This story begins with the fact that after one girl's entire family is destroyed, she is left with only one acquaintance left in her life, who has protected her for the past 13 years, and when she was kidnapped, he helped her escape to freedom. But this time, he didn't succeed. Ayana, even in such circumstances, when she knows that she is about to be destroyed, she still thinks of him, because it is unknown whether he managed to defend himself or not. From those people who wanted to do to him what was now happening to the girl, they locked her in a cold room to destroy her after a while, as well as her whole family. But before her death, she longs to see him, or at least know that he survived. His name is Diaval, the real savior who kept her alive for 13 years. As suddenly, the next morning, she heard some footsteps, and was sure it was the man who had come to destroy her, because it was what she thought was the last day of her life. But when the girl saw the guy's face, she couldn't believe her eyes. Ayana recognized him immediately, and at the same time she didn't understand how he had found her, since she was safely hidden in a secret place, so that no one could get to her and save her. In that moment, she knew she was safe with him. It was Diaval. His presence seemed to tell her that if he was around, she was automatically saved. Ayana immediately started asking how he managed to survive, and if he was okay, to which he replied that he wouldn't have let himself leave her here alone. So, he did the impossible, and found her. He looked like a real hero in her eyes. But was it really that easy for him to sneak in here, and once through security? As suddenly, she was very curious as to why he looked so good. Because if he was going through a difficult journey, or fighting someone, he'd have some injuries, and at the very least, not be in a good mood. But it was quite the opposite. It was as if he had made a deal with the people who had locked her in here, and now she was completely free. Only for some reason, Diaval still gave no details, and when the girl asked him to open the doors so that she could get out as soon as possible, he asked if she wanted to run away. After these words, the girl definitely stopped understanding what was going on. After all, she thought he had come here for this very purpose. So Ayana immediately wondered what he had come here for, if not to free her. When all of a sudden the guy said he was only here to propose. But what he meant was not at all clear. The girl even began to assume that it was not the real Diaval standing before her. After all, if it had been him, they would have been out long ago, though it's possible he has some sort of plan in mind. At this point, the guy asked her if she remembered once they went to a play, a story about two lovers. Their families were enemies, so they couldn't be together, and the protagonist dropped a drug that can slow down life processes. But most of all, Ayana wanted to know why he was talking about it in this particular situation. To which the guy replied that the protagonist thought his lover had actually died. Because of this, did the same to follow her. And if that guy hadn't been wrong then, I wonder how things might have unfolded. He went on to speculate that if the main characters had made a different choice, if the only surviving child would have made a different choice. As a result, things could have been very different. And also, for some reason, he wonders if the girl could get revenge as a result. Ayana listened to everything he said, but still doesn't understand what he meant by it. Then, he reiterated that he would like to see this version of the story where things would be very different. Afterward, Diaval asked her another question. If Ayana had acted differently, what might have been the result of the... All these questions sounded so strange that the girl didn't even know how to react to it, as if she was facing a completely different person, not the Diaval she knew before. His gaze was not as usual, and at this moment, the girl was beginning to doubt that she would be saved. When suddenly, the guy reminded her that he had an offer for her, and thus, everything would be new. And if she agrees to that, he can give her another chance. A chance to take it all back and start over. It's a really great chance to get out, only to accept the offer of someone who's changed a lot, and from whom it is now unknown what to expect, was very risky. But in any case, it is definitely better than to die in such conditions. After a while, the girl began to suspect him that maybe he was now on the side of the people who were the reason she was here, and who had destroyed her entire family. She became very curious about it, so Ayana asked him if that was really the case, to which he replied that it wasn't at all what she thought it was. But now, the girl had no reason to trust him. When it was clear to her, she couldn't take it anymore, and said that if he was on her side and wanted to protect her like he had, he'd have gotten her out of here a long time ago. And I wouldn't be talking to her at that moment about some play. Sometime later, it was morning outside, and after a long conversation, Diaval reminded him that there was very little time left, and if she doesn't make the right decision in time, it could be a big mistake. Because she's about to be destroyed, and before it's too late, she really has to make a choice. Because after a few minutes, he won't be able to help her. So you have to answer now. At this moment, Ayana hated everything that was happening. Because now, even the person she trusted the most had changed so much. And at the very last moment, Diaval once again asked if she was ready to respond to his offer. On the one hand, this man can no longer be trusted. But on the other hand, if she agrees, she can live at least a little longer. And there will be at least some possibility of escape. Surprisingly, a few hours ago, she had waited for this man, and considered him a true friend. Of course, this was not how she had imagined meeting this man. But she had no other option. And as a result, Ayana agreed to his proposal after all. And afterward, the girl said that even after he betrayed her, she would go to any lengths to get revenge on them. And if he would help her in any way, she would agree to all the conditions. Except he still hasn't given her all the details and what she owes him. Instead, he just smiled and didn't say anything. Ayana still can't believe that before, she trusted this man more than she trusted herself. When suddenly, for some reason, he started to get down on his knees, and then kissed her hand. And during the whole of this conversation, it was the most unpleasant thing she had ever felt. Because as of late, she's been incredibly uncomfortable being in his presence, and even more so when he started touching her. But so far, she's had to put up with it. At that moment, through the touch of her hand, he had somehow released her. And after that, he said let the next story have the ending she wanted it to have. And the next thing she saw and felt was that she was in a different place now. It was some unfamiliar room where she wakes up and doesn't realize what's going on. For the last thing she saw was Diaval, with whom she was in that dark and cold place. She doesn't understand how she cannot remember the moment she was here. Everything happened so fast that the girl didn't even have time to realize anything. It was like magic or traveling to another world. Plus, Diaval hadn't even warned her about where she'd end up after her agreement, and what awaited her next. Because of this, it's much harder for her to understand what's going on, and start planning something. Because the girl doesn't even know where she is, or how long she's going to stay here. But the only thing she knows at this point is that Diaval has gone over to their side, as much as she doesn't want to believe it. The old Diaval she had known would never have done such a thing. And after the girl had lost her family, she had no one left at all but him. And apparently those people offered him a lot of money or something for which he was willing to do that to her. After all, it's obvious he would never have done it of his own volition. When suddenly, some assistant came into her room. She wanted to warn her that the master was coming back today, and it was necessary to prepare for his arrival. But as it turns out, Ayana knows this girl, and even remembers her name. But how could this happen? Is she really time-traveled? Sophia's assistant looks just as Ayana remembers her, but it's been 13 years since that time. Sophia is the senior maid of the Lihar family, but because she died that night many years ago, the girl saw it with her own eyes. After that, the assistant said one phrase that the girl definitely didn't expect to hear, that her father was returning today, which meant that Ayana was in the time when he was still alive. She could not believe what she had just heard, because it could not be. Because of the strong surprise, Sophia thought that the girl was not awake yet, so suggested that she go to wash up and clean herself up. When the girl tried to understand what was going on, she couldn't, because she had no time to talk. She had to meet her father, because he had been away from home for months. It turns out that Ayana has indeed returned to her past, where her family is still alive. But what's the purpose of that? Does she have a chance to influence her future, and maybe even save her family? And when she saw herself in the mirror, she saw herself in the past. A young and beautiful Ayana who has no idea yet of what's next for her. But does it have anything to do with her agreeing to Diaval's proposal? But for now, it remains to be seen if that's actually the case. When the girl came out of her room and saw that gorgeous palace, she knew it all at once. It was too obvious. Ayana went back to her past, which was 13 years ago. She doubted to the last that it was all real, for she was sure it could all be a dream. Things would be so much more beautiful if the girl would just go back to a time when everything was fine. But instead, she has to fulfill her main purpose. Meanwhile, she's met her in-laws. Must be a very strange feeling, especially when she already knows what their fate is like. It was her brother Royd. They were very similar in appearance, and especially with his sister Cecilia. Also, they had another brother, named Blair, who was the youngest. As the girl was coming down to the first floor, he noticed them, and they saw her surprised look of. It was very strange of them to see how surprised their sister looked at them, as if seeing them for the first time in her life. They immediately called her over to their place, and apparently they have a very good relationship with each other, except that because she already knows their future, it's hard for her to be around them, because they're her closest people who are doomed to a terrible fate. When she approached them, her sister immediately noticed that something was wrong with her, and started asking what was wrong with her. Cecilia wasn't the only one who began to worry about her. Her two brothers were also concerned about her condition. They didn't understand why she was so sad, because usually she was always in a good mood, no matter what. And even in the worst situation, she never looked sad. And now she was crying really hard, and no matter how much they tried to calm her down, it wasn't working. There were two reasons why she couldn't hold back her emotions. One, it was very hard to look at the people she loved and know that soon they would die. Two, she missed them very much, and as she had longed for years to regain those moments when she could be there for them, and when she did, she was overcome with incredible emotion that were simply impossible to hide and conceal. Ayana was so happy to see them, but at the same time, most of all, she didn't want what would happen to them in a few years' time. Meanwhile, all the helpers were preparing for the arrival of the father of the family. It was a very welcome day. So everyone was prepared and greeted him appropriately to show how welcome he was and how much his family missed him. Ayana remembered the moment perfectly well, but still tried to understand how she should act and how she could prevent the fate of her entire family, because she's the only one who can do it, and she's the only one who knows what's going to happen in a few years. But she didn't plan to tell about it, of course, because no one wants to know in advance what will happen in the future, especially if it's something bad. It turns out that Ayana, Cecilia, Blair, and Royd all look a lot like their father. When everyone started asking him how he was doing and what interesting things had happened to him in the meantime, Ayana couldn't hold back her tears and cried very hard when she saw her father. She was very glad to see him alive and well, for in that moment, in the whole of that day, her most important dream had come true, to see her family, when suddenly, she turned her attention to a familiar man who was approaching them as they were talking to her father. But whether to rejoice or dread his appearance, she did not know, and was in anticipation of finding out what would result from the encounter. And with every step he took, the girl grew more and more afraid of what he was about to say to her, for she remembered that she owed him some wish but for some reason, he didn't say a word about it. Instead, he just introduced himself and said it was nice to meet her. It turns out that as of today, he's in charge of guarding her family, and will also be hoping for a warm welcome. Except that in her recollection, their last conversation had not been warm at all, but rather the opposite, unpleasant and terrible. After that meeting, exactly 1 month had passed, and from that moment, today, they had met for the first time. And after that, exactly 1 month later, her whole family had died. It turns out that she has exactly 1 month left to correct and change the fate of the entire family, and if she doesn't, she'll be doomed as a result. In the meantime, it was night, and as usual, before going to bed, the girl's assistant came in and said good night, to which the girl reciprocated in kind. At this moment, she didn't even think of going to bed, because there were still too many thoughts to think through. It was necessary to remember all the most important moments, thanks to which she would be able to prevent all the bad things that were to happen in the near future. But on top of that, the girl was also constantly reminded of what it was like to live in a happy family, not knowing that there were other ways of doing things. Ayana had truly forgotten what it was like to have a family, for not long ago, she was all alone, and a few days ago, she had lost even her best friend, who had betrayed her and gone over to the side of her enemies. Before returning to the past, having lost her family, Ayana married Baron Facito's only son. They had a child, but they never became a family. There were rumors that their son had developmental problems, so the guy's parents found a girl from some unknown family for them to marry. I mean, it had to be Ayana. She heard that this son destroyed a servant girl in his house, and she's likely to meet the same fate. She's just stepped into this house. She was immediately conditioned that she could only give birth to a son here, because she had no money and no family. That is, her value in this house was not there from the first day. They wanted only one thing from her. And on her first day, She was warned that if she ever thought of leaving this place, she'd regret it. And since then, there was no more of that girl who grew up loving and caring, making plans for the future. When it was time to give birth, there was a very scary situation. There were serious problems with it. You had to choose who was going to live, either the baby or the mother. Some man insisted that the child should be saved first, and if they were lucky, the girl would be alive. Ayana was sick of her husband, of his family, but her child. She hoped that if she could love him, she could at least breathe a little easier. But unfortunately, he never made it out alive. For whatever reason, he just didn't stand a chance. And all this time, God was the only person who stood by her in every situation and never left her side. Before, he had always been genuinely sorry that she had to suffer like this. He had even said that he was sick of it all and ready to destroy those who treated her badly. And after that, offered to run away to any place he could. He wanted to show her a life that would be much better than this one, where the girl would finally be happy and forget everything like a terrible dream. At that moment, he was willing to give his life for her. And perhaps it was through these words and actions alone that he won her trust. Except she didn't agree to escape. She decided to stay at the Facito family home. Ayana was well aware that once she had no defenses, there would be many who would try to destroy them. Though she was sure that with Diaval, she would be able to handle any situation. But still, they'd been forced into hiding, living in those conditions, and she didn't want him to have to go through all that. She had to think about it every day, because she had to make the right decision. And even now it makes her uncomfortable to think of him, and to think of him before she goes to sleep. For now she knows what kind of a man he is. And since it wasn't a good idea to spend time reminiscing about the past, she tried not to. And besides, she had a chance to influence the future, and it wasn't to be missed. A few years later, an epidemic swept the empire. No one knew how to deal with it, because it happened too suddenly. This disease took many of the people of the Facito family, and after bidding farewell to the dead, the girl took charge of the family of her 2 young sons. In other words, she became a true mistress. Then the moment for her revenge came. All those years of pain and suffering, all for this moment. Roselle's family learned of her whereabouts too late, and so they could no longer act rashly. At that point, she dedicated her entire life to revenge. Hidden struggle, lies, competition, protection of territories. She ran down that dark path, not noticing how she was gradually running toward her not-so-good fate. But now, she has a chance to see her family that she's wanted so badly to see all these years. But the chance heaven has given her, she should take it to the fullest. Ayana has made a final decision. Though at the same time all too obvious, she will not allow her family members to perish. And whatever happened, she must prevent the worst that was to happen in the next month. Time was really too short. And she seemed to be gradually beginning to think out her plan, when suddenly someone knocked at her room and asked permission to enter, to which the girl replied that it was all right to come in. But surprisingly, at this late hour, Diaval wanted to see her, so he had something to offer her again. As a friend, she asked him one very important and interesting question, if he had anything he wanted to tell her about, to which the guy asked what she wanted him to say. She must have gone back in time because the deal he offered her, because it's not like a dream. Besides, such an ability is beyond the power of an ordinary person, and that's what she wanted to hear from him, because she was sure he was hiding something. When suddenly, Ayana saw again the very smile she had recently come to hate. Diaval began to tell her already known information, that he was her loyal knight. On top of that, he was her devoted fan. But the most interesting thing he said at the end, he was the devil. But could it really be true? In the same second, he got red eyes and that sinister smile. She had never expected to hear such a thing from him. For until now, she had never thought she would ever hear such a thing from him. Ayana thought and hoped to the last minute that he was just joking, because that just couldn't be the case. The embodiment of true evil, which very much spoils a person, destroys his soul and pulls him to the very bottom. Except it doesn't look like he was trying to make a joke or anything like that. And you can especially tell by his weird smile, which is very different from how it used to be. When a girl begins to realize that there may be a real devil near her, she becomes very scared. But at the same time, she begins to understand a lot of things. Except if he really is the devil, and he's telling the truth, that changes things considerably. And now she has no choice but to accept that there's no way to change it, and it would be pointless to even try. Despite the absurdity of the situation, All his strange actions and that smirk should have made her realize sooner who he really was. But she had another question she also wanted an honest answer to, so that she could at least somehow understand who she was talking to and what that person needed. And surprisingly, he graciously agreed to answer anything she was interested in. The girl asked why he was only now telling her about who he really was. And did the man who had been by her side for 13 long years have something to hide from her? But apparently, judging by his reaction, he did. To which Diaval replied that she'd just never been interested in it, nor had she asked him such questions. Except the way he gave the answer is starting to really piss her off. It's like he's still hiding something she's better off not knowing. Because the Diaval she remembers never spoke or behaved like that, Ayana still wants to understand why he's responding so differently from his old self. She feels like she doesn't know him at all. Then, she asked him another question. Why did he come only when she was already on the verge of ruin? If he could easily turn back time, why didn't he do it sooner? To which he replied that he was just having fun. Now, it was too obvious by now that he was a completely different person, and trusting him as before was better not necessary. Each time she was more and more afraid to hear anything from him, because every answer he gave said that some devil was really speaking in his place. Afterward, Diaval added that the girl had lived quite an interesting life, and he had never once regretted helping her escape. Because the devil can't help but love a thrilling story, it's kind of fun for him. But the longer someone lives, the harder it is to get them interested in anything. So people like him come to a special theater world where they can watch people's lives as if they were watching a play. And he's always dreamed of being in the front row, and apparently he's made it. According to him, it was really fascinating and interesting, except that for some reason he didn't ask anyone if the person he was observing wanted it, and whose life he was making the way only he wanted it to be lived. It turns out that when Ayana was given the title of head of the family, he became much more interested. Diaval believed for a moment that she could get revenge, but alas, the outcome was unfortunate. So he got curious, and he asked if she'd make it this time, to which the girl replied that she was disappointed in him, and didn't think he was such a horrible person, because Ayana was sure that he had been by her side all these years. But as it turned out, he didn't love her, didn't respect her, didn't appreciate her, and turned out to be an ordinary traitor who was just interested in watching her suffer, and tries to find a way out of the most difficult situations where her family and herself suffer. When suddenly, he did say that he loved her after all. But the girl could stand it no longer, and told him not to dare to lie to her any longer, and if he really loved her, he would not watch her and her sufferings, but would do his best to make her happy. But for some reason, he still said he loved her. As a viewer, he loved the protagonist, that is, her, and that is what obliged him to stay away and not participate in what was going on, because as he believes, the viewer cannot interfere with the plot. Those words brought her to tears. Ayana hated him in that second, and couldn't believe that she had once trusted him more than she trusted anyone else. And each time he said words that were more and more hurtful, it was too much for her to listen to. The girl no longer had any confidence in him, for just now, with his words, he had destroyed it once and for all. She tried her best to ask him to stop talking about it in the voice of a man she'd known almost her entire life. Then, she finally found the strength to respond, and said that if he found the play boring, he could just get up and leave. To which he replied that he couldn't let such an interesting main character not meet a similar end. So he gave her another chance. From this, Ayana immediately concluded, he only stayed around because he was interested in watching her. To which Diaval replied that she'd gotten it right. The girl lacked words to describe her surprise and hatred for this man, when suddenly she stood up very abruptly and wanted to hit him. And it is not surprising because after such words, such a desire appears automatically. But somehow, he didn't feel it at all, and wondered if he should turn another cheek so she could hit him again if need be. But this made her even more angry, because the girl wants to feel completely powerless against him, did not realize that he did not even feel any pain. Ayana didn't even want to hide her emotions. She was having a hard time finding the words to describe how much she hated him. After the blow, her arm was very sore, and by this act she hurt herself, though she wanted very much for him to feel the pain she had felt from his words. But even at the sight of a woman's tears, he kept smiling as if he was doing it on purpose. It really brings him pleasure to see someone's breasts are suffering. As suddenly, Diaval suggested that if she liked and felt like hitting him, she could do it as much as she wanted to, And those were the only nice words Ayana had heard from him lately. All her pain when she had married unwillingly, when she had been threatened with life but had given birth to a child, when she had sobbed nights missing her family. To him it was just an interesting performance. She still can't believe that the man she thought was her friend could have saved her family, but didn't just because he was interested in watching it. And he seemed to have something to say to that. And of course it wasn't without a smirk. It felt like he got a mood and strength when someone was suffering because of him. Diaval asked if she wanted to know why he had only now decided to help her. For there was indeed a reason for it. It turns out that he believed that the girls will manage without him, by their own efforts, and whether the play will remain as fascinating if a minor character interferes in the life of the protagonist, to which the girl could scarcely find it to reply that she loved him. And all the time when he was not around, she longed to see his eyes and hear his voice. But when it happened, it was the best moment they'd ever known. But for some reason, in that moment, he wondered if she loved him now. To which she replied that the only thing she wanted to do now was to destroy him, and she felt no pleasant emotions around him. Diaval said there's a bit of a problem with that because he's obligated to see how this story ends. And then he touched her cheek and said he was on her side. But he made it sound like empty words and nothing more. And since he's gotten this far, he just can't deny himself the pleasure of watching a thrilling finale. For that, he's willing to do his best to help Ayana out. But no matter what he says, and no matter how sincere he seems, it won't help him. He's not worthy of even a second of her attention. The girl answered that all this time, she blindly believed that he was a real hero, who in any situation could give his life to make her happy. But as it turned out, he was just a traitor. So, she had absolutely no desire to continue this conversation, and Ayana asked him to disappear so she would never see him again. But he didn't seem to mind at all, and surprisingly his smile didn't disappear even in this situation of her asking him to leave. Of course he obeyed her and started to leave at once, except that he had one last thing to warn her about, namely, that Ayana would always remember that no matter where he was, or what conflicts there were between them, he would never leave her. This guy is a really amazing person. He says one thing, but his actions say the opposite, and how you can believe him and what to pay attention to. It's hard to understand. The only emotion the girl felt at that moment was disappointment, because the realization that this man could have helped her and saved her family. But he didn't. Makes you just hate everything around you. Ayana will apparently never be able to trust people again, even if she knows them as long and is as sure of them as she once was of Diaval. After he left, the girl couldn't accept and realize what she had just learned for a long time. It was already night outside the window, but it seemed she wouldn't be able to fall asleep. She was thinking about something every second, and she couldn't calm down, because there were too many people around her who had bad intentions for her. And now, she was sure of it. She couldn't forget his last words, and the look he'd been giving her at the time. She was completely devastated inside. All her beliefs that he was a hero just vanished in an instant. And the worst part was that now he wasn't even hiding it. Ayana began to feel as if there was one shell left of her, because her soul was so difficult and painful that it just couldn't take it, and left her. She wanted desperately to go to sleep and never wake up again. But at one point, she remembered her family and realized there was no time for that, because in a month's time, the inevitable would happen. There was not much time left. It was necessary to come up with a foolproof plan that would prevent the terrible fate of many people. The day of the tragedy. It was a very ordinary day. No one even knew it was possible. What happened during dinner? The girl's father began to cough suddenly, and it was evident from his appearance that he was beginning to perish because he could not bear the unbearable pain. Then, Sister Cecilia, she lost control of her body, and after a while, lost consciousness. At that moment, strangers rushed into the living room. They were heading towards Royd, who was holding his father's hand. And as a result, they got to little Blair, and afterward to the helpers, who were also defenseless. It was so horrible that she remembered every moment of it for the rest of her life, but she was too scared, unable to orient herself to protect anyone. It all happened so suddenly that no one could realize anything. And so, since she has the opportunity to stop them and come up with a plan that will protect her entire family, she's obligated to do so. Ayana wondered if she should tell her father what the future held. But then she would have to explain that she had come from the future, and no one would believe it. So they had to act on their own, and preferably without anyone suspecting anything. because if anyone realized they were in danger, it would be even worse. If the girl were the mistress of this house, as it was in her past life, she would increase the guards. But unfortunately, it is impossible. Now it is no different from her past self. She is an ordinary young aristocrat. Ayana finally decided that in this life she will not just sit and wait for her savior, because now her family will not protect anyone but her, and to rely on someone else, as it became known, a bad idea. First, she needed a piece of paper and a pen to write down all the most important thoughts and ideas, so she wouldn't forget anything important. When the girl went to the mirror, she looked at herself and noticed something interesting. It was some dark spot, which she decided to look closer. It was a pattern of some sort, except that she couldn't remember when it might have appeared, or how it happened. She had more questions that unfortunately weren't answered, but obviously made some sense. 2 days later, the weather was gorgeous, and if it weren't for the problems that needed to be solved, Ayana would be the happiest person ever. A hot bath with rose petals was prepared for her as usual. Being in this room was her favorite thing to do at the beginning of each day. It helped her to relax and forget about her problems in some way. When it was time to do her hair, the assistant started talking about the new knight. He seemed incredibly handsome to her. Except that if she knew who this person really was, she would never think that way. Ayana didn't want to not tell her anything, so she pretended to agree with her. Because obviously it's better that no one knows about it. Because if the guy finds out, the girl will probably regret it. They haven't seen each other for a while. It's like he's avoiding her and trying to stay out of her sight. And the amazing thing is, Ayana doesn't like it when he's around. But when he's not, she doesn't like it either. Does she still have some feelings for him and wants to be around him? And if it wasn't for his changes, she would still dream of being his girlfriend. Because before, he was truly the best man she knew. When she tried not to think about him for just one day, every assistant wouldn't stop talking to her about it. They were just as in love with this handsome man. But don't know, it's a very big mistake yet. Finally, the bathtub was already filled with enough water, and after that, the helpers offered their help, to which the girl replied that from this day, it was not necessary. So, they could be free. And it's no wonder Ayana tries to take any opportunity where she can relax or think about something important, and taking a bath is the perfect opportunity to enjoy solitude. But that wasn't the only reason the girl released all her assistants. She wanted to scrutinize the pattern on her body, and here, that would work out best. Looking at the pattern, the girl made the decision that she still needed to meet with him after all, and discuss something. As much as she didn't want to, she would have to. In the meantime, Ayana is enjoying this beautiful morning, because it's not a given that she'll be able to make it through the day. In the meantime, she did manage to get a meeting with Diaval to find out more. But when the girl told him what she had come for, he somehow didn't understand what it was all about. To which the girl replied that she meant the pattern that was on her body, and to make it clearer to him she offered to show it, to which the guy replied that he was not interested in it, so it was unnecessary. But isn't there anything he can do to help even in this relatively easy situation, or tell her anything interesting? As suddenly, he began to tell me that each devil has his own special mark, and they can never match from one person to another. When a man makes a deal with the devil, the former has it in the same place as the latter, but the fact that this mark can be seen by ordinary people, she does not like. So the girl asked to remove the mark immediately, to which the guy replied that he cannot do it, because it is proof of his deal with her. So Ayana suggested another option, because she didn't want to leave the mark on this place. The girl offered to move it to another place so that no one could see it. But unfortunately, he couldn't do that either. And since scars, burns, and marks should not be on the body of a noble aristocrat, with it, she cannot even marry. To which the guy replied, did she call him just to ask him that? But the girl reminded him that some time ago, he had promised that he would help her in everything, and asked if those had been empty words. Perhaps he really did have the ability to help her, but for some reason, he was lazy. And since the girl assumed this, she said that if he really was the devil, he must have powers with which he could help her. Ayana still hasn't forgiven him, but something tells me she wants to, because when he's not around, even after what happened, she still obviously misses him, even though she doesn't admit it to herself sometimes. Since he was able to bring her back to the past, he definitely has some powers, which means she won't have to turn to her father, and she can protect everyone, and get revenge without his help. The only thing she had learned well was that there was no need to be afraid of the devil. It was much better to use a capable devil for her own purposes, and it was better not to try to fight him. You just had to accept that fact and adapt to what was happening. As expected, he still has the opportunity to help, but on the condition that it's a favorable exchange and she has something to offer. At that moment, Ayana felt a very unpleasant energy, like when she saw him after many years. But even so, she agreed to his proposal. The girl asked him to create the strongest defense around her house, and if he did that, it would be the best help he could give, to which he replied that he would easily do it. But the girl did not even doubt it, for she knew perfectly well that if there was any gain for him, he would gladly do anything. And in order for him to better understand his assignment, Ayana repeated her request. She needs a huge defense that can stand up to the Roselle family. How suddenly, for some unknown reason, things didn't go according to plan. When the girl was already happy that she had a chance to save the whole family, Diaval refused for some reason, and didn't even explain why. And when the girl asked why he changed his mind so quickly, the guy replied that he would only agree to this arrangement if she paid first, to which the girl replied that he could be sure of that. Then, he decided to remind her of a moment that had happened recently. He asked her to remember what she had told him when she had made the deal with him. It turns out Ayana had promised to give him everything she owned, but for the moment, the girl is terrified of what that might mean, and what he might ask for. And at this point, she wondered if it was working out that she had nothing else to offer him, to which he replied that he did, and when she heard of it, she immediately said that there was no point in leaving him in this palace now. So, she warned him that if he did not help her, he might leave this house. And surprisingly, Diaval gave his answer without any hesitation. He refused to help her, to which the girl asked him to leave. Otherwise, she would be forced to inform her father that he was a devil. And even that didn't make him stop smiling. Diaval asked if she was so sure he could hear her. And at that moment, Ayana finally stopped understanding what he meant. Whether he had hurt her father in some way, or was just trying to scare her away from telling anyone. It turns out that ever since the devil's bargains were invented, no one has been able to hear anything about it except themselves. It's to keep it a secret anyway, because these things are very hard and important for most people to keep secret. From despair, the girl no longer understood how she would be able to achieve her goal, because even he refuses to help, a man for whom it is the easiest thing to do. Lastly, he said one very strange thing, that Diaval the devil really couldn't help her in any way. But here was Diaval the human, happy to do so when needed. It was as if in a moment he turned into a normal person who was willing to do anything within his means. The girl noticed at once that he spoke as if asking her to let him be her knight again, so she replied that what she wanted most of all was to never see him again, to which he suggested that she think about how many people she could ask for help. There just weren't any of them. And here he was, perfect for her. And could she really turn down such a helper? But since he was really right, it made her even more angry. The girl felt completely hopeless and weak, because without him she can never really do anything. And anyway, you have to listen to him and do what he suggests, because sometimes it's really good advice. At this point, she had many regrets about being born a girl, to which the guy replied that even though she wasn't an older brother, she had something that none of her brothers had. As it turned out, he was referring to the memories she still has, and the anger when she couldn't save her loved ones. With every word he said, she listened more and more attentively, for he was right about something. In this situation, despite the past, he was the only person who could help her. It turns out that the devil only chose her because he finds her far more interesting and valuable than any of her brothers. And also, he somehow has confidence that in any case, the girl will definitely cope with all the problems, and for her there is nothing that she cannot do. But whether he says it sincerely or not, a very big question. For the first time in a long time, Ayana heard him say nice words that inspire her to do great things and give her confidence that everything will work out. And that's the most important thing of all. But she still couldn't understand why he was now talking about her being more prominent than the head of the family. After all, she was an ordinary aristocrat, and he somehow believed that she could handle this problem. The girl is well aware that there is a huge probability that all this, just empty words, which is pointless to believe in. And after that, he asked her one very important question, on which would depend really a great deal, whether to let her stay by her side. But it was one of the most difficult questions she had ever answered, for to agree with him was a very great risk, just as it had been when she trusted him. The girl didn't even have time to get it all right before someone knocked on her room. Only that's who it could be. As the girl lived in constant anticipation of danger, even in this situation she was very frightened, for she did not even know who was behind the door. But luckily, after a few seconds, she recognized the voice as her sister, except it was all a bit of bad timing. Well, since they were on good terms, the girl couldn't show her, especially considering how much she now cherished her family. Except, is Diaval going to stay in this room and be okay with the fact that they're about to be seen by some person who's going to start asking what they were discussing here? Ayana hoped that he would just disappear, like a real devil, so as not to cause unnecessary problems, because what they did not have time to discuss could be done a little later. In any case, even if he didn't, the girl decided to act clearly and confidently, because if her sister suspected her of anything, there could be big trouble. Cecilia enters the room and sees that her sister is not alone, so she doesn't immediately realize what they can talk about, because he is just in charge of the security of the palace, and they can't have any common topics. But she is just wrong. And at this point, the guy decided not to stay in this room after all. He said goodbye, and said that after some time, they would have to meet again to settle everything. He was the only one in the room who had a smile on his face. He really seemed to like it when someone didn't understand something, or was afraid, or couldn't do it without his help. Did he really enjoy it when someone needed him? After he found him, the girl's sister immediately began to ask if this was not the knight with whom their father had come. And after that, she also wondered why Ayana had summoned him to her. To which the girl replied that she just wanted to talk to him about something. To which the sister replied that she understood her interest perfectly well, but asked her to remember her reputation, for she had a fiancé. It was expected to hear from her sister, and in this situation, since she doesn't know anything more than that, and she can be understood, and if things weren't the way they really are, she would be really right. It turns out that Ayana had completely forgotten that she actually has a fiancé, who, by the way, she hasn't seen in a long time. Before the tragedy happened to her family, she had a fiancé, a beautiful guy, who was also a knight. She was so happy then, as if she was the main character of a love novel. And then, her sister was also worried about her, so the girl didn't want to upset her, and promised to be more careful from now on. Afterward, Cecilia inquired if her sister had prepared her dress, but apparently somebody had quite forgotten about it, and had not prepared anything. It turns out that she had to get her dress ready to go to a very important event that should never be missed, and apparently her sister was a little more worried about it than Ayana herself. Cecilia did not expect that her sister could have forgotten such an event, for not long ago, she had prigged with joy when she received an invitation from Lady Fleda. Ayana really couldn't remember anything because since that time, more than 10 years had passed. So if it wasn't for her sister, she would still be unprepared. But it seems the girl starts to remember where she's heard the name before, and after a while, she's got it right. It turns out the girl she's supposed to go to at the event is named Fleda Roselle, except it's unclear whether that's good news or bad news. When Cecilia asked if she really did not remember it, and might have forgotten, the girl replied that of course not, and she remembered everything perfectly, though in fact, if it had not been for her sister, she would have remembered nothing. Fleda Roselle. There is not a single person in high society who does not know the eldest daughter of the Roselle family, an influential family, beautiful looks, and the magic of attraction. The girl starts to remember that even she once admired her. After receiving the invitation, she was in such a state of elation that she couldn't sleep for days, and it turns out that the man from that family invites her a month before destroying their family. On the one hand, she will probably hate to see the people who will get her whole family killed in a month. But on the other hand, this is a great opportunity to notice and learn things that she didn't even know about before, and thus it will help her avoid a terrible fate. It was very interesting for her to find out if this girl knew about the plan to destroy Ayana's family, and if she knew and invited her to the event anyway. That changes a lot of things. It was very noticeable that from the outside, she looked very upset, and it was not surprising, except that the sister could not understand what could make her sad, because she had waited for this event for a long time. When Cecilia suggested that she should get some rest, the girl replied that she was all right, and that she was very glad to go to this event which Lady Fleta herself was putting on. She tried to pretend that she was very happy, although in fact, she didn't want to see these people more than anything. But in order not to upset her sister, she forced herself to smile when in fact, she wanted to cry. Cecilia doesn't even realize that her sister knows their future, and it was probably the right decision not to tell the whole family about it, because no one wants to find out that something terrible is going to happen in a month, and at that, to each of them. Except that before going to the event, the girl knew for sure that she wouldn't go there without someone who could save her if she needed it. And among these people, in this situation, it was really necessary. So, she didn't want to take any risks, and took Diaval with her. During the journey he kept saying that he was surprised at her request, for he was sure she would not want to see him, and even in such a situation would be willing to go without him. But no, for his own safety, he would be much better and more at ease with him. At the same time, unlike the girl, the guy felt completely calm, although he knew perfectly well what to expect as a result of this meeting. In this situation, only Ayana did not know what to do. But not to think about that. They started talking about things they hadn't had time to talk about some time ago. Diaval wondered if she had been able to forgive him. He was really very interested in that. To which the girl replied that she'd only called him along to keep herself safe, and he'd do a better job of it than the others. And at this point, the guy began to suspect that she must definitely have some sort of plan, because knowing ahead of time what these people would do, she couldn't just go to meet them. It was just too obvious. To which the girl asked what he would do if she suddenly asked him to destroy one of them. Not even a second passed before he answered that question without question. He said he would fulfill her request and destroy whoever needed to be destroyed, as it was the easiest thing for him to do. After that answer, he wondered why the girl had such a surprised reaction, to which she replied that it was just a joke, and she wasn't going to act so rashly. Then, he was even more curious to know what her purpose was in going to this place. After all, it couldn't be that she was just going to have a nice chat with them. So Diaval asked again what her plan was. The girl replied that she needed something solid to convince her father, and that was very difficult. But that answer didn't help in any way to understand what she was up to after all. It was as if she had answered, but at the same time, there was no specificity whatsoever. It turns out that all these years, Ayana has been trying to understand something very important that she never even thought about before. Why exactly her family was targeted by the Roselle family. It's been so long and she's never been able to find out the real reason. But something she knows for sure. There is a reason. What man there was told her why he gave the order to destroy. But the girl will never believe these words. She is sure that such a thing simply can't happen. Diaval did not expect that William was going to destroy the king, and not surprisingly, it was carefully kept secret, and no one knew about it. The current ruler is Casimir Kelbright. He was the second prince. He could not claim the throne, but the previous king and the first prince died suddenly, so that unexpectedly, the title went to him, to which the guy replied that obviously someone had something to do with it. A lot of people suspected Casimir. There were rumors, but after a few people who suspected it were eliminated, everyone else stopped talking about it right away. But the girl was sure that her father would never have gone against the king, and Ansgar was just trying to justify himself. And the reason was obviously different, but it just had to be found out somehow. When the guy asked if she had any guesses, the girl said that she had a few theories, but so far she wasn't sure about them. Leharf and Roselle, despite their loyalty to the current king, were constantly vying for power. After the throne passed to Casimir, Roselle lost the trust of the new ruler and could well be the object of his wrath. And not surprisingly, they wanted to come out of the shadows and prove themselves so everyone could see what they could do. So most likely Ansgar planned to make her family look like bad people in order to destroy them all, and by announcing that they were plotting something against the king. That way he wanted to show him his good intentions. Secondly, he wanted to appropriate all the property of the Lichar family and consolidate his power. Thirdly, her father was the chief confidant of the previous king. He could easily be accused of something bad. Plus, none of her family, his 4 children, are married. So there was no problem with the other families that each of them could be a part of if they were someone's bride or groom. But so far, it's just her guess, which still needs to be confirmed. And that's not easy. because all this information has been carefully hidden for years. And if someone finds out that someone tried to find out about it, there could be problems. But in any case, the real truth is not known to anyone. For now, it is too early to draw any conclusions and assumptions. And it was for this purpose, to find out about everything years later, that she agreed to this meeting, and did not stay at home, because most likely something would happen there that she would not have paid attention to before. At this point, she should do a very good job of pretending that she didn't know anything at all about anything, and had only come to have a good time this evening, with no intentions whatsoever of doing so. And the amazing thing is that for such an important job, she asked the person she should trust the least to go with her. But even so, she still has no other choice. If she doesn't do it, she may never get revenge on those people. At that moment, for some reason, they began to remember which of them had done something bad lately, and tried to blame each other for something, though it was pointless. But when the girl started blaming him for every single thing he did, he immediately suggested that he could leave to make her feel more comfortable, and afterward reminded her that she had called him to come with her. As a result of this conversation, they did accept the fact that it was better not to create any conflicts, and as long as possible, to help each other if necessary. It was the only conversation lately where he didn't sound like the devil. He seemed like a normal person who was trying to help her. And of course the girl noticed it very well, and perhaps she still had hope deep down inside that he would someday be the same old Diaval. To this day, she continues to dream that one day, she'll be truly happy, and most importantly, she'll be able to save her family. As a result, the guy reminded her that there was no point in being disappointed in each other, and he would let her see a compelling story, to which the girl replied that it would be nice if he was always on her side to protect her if needed, and that would be enough. Meanwhile, they had already arrived at their destination. Everything inside was incredibly beautiful. There was a nice atmosphere, and lots of yummy food. And most importantly, they should never forget what they came here for. And since the atmosphere around them is conducive to forgetting that, they should try to remember what their purpose is after all. In the palace was so beautiful that everyone had the desire to walk endlessly through the rooms and look at this incredible beauty around them. The first thing they decided to do was to walk around the area, looking carefully for the girl called Fleta. But so far she was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she had just gone somewhere else. When suddenly, she was noticed by some girls. They immediately came up to her, and for some reason, looked very happy, like they were really happy to see her. But for now, Ayana wasn't exactly in the right mood to sweet-talk some people who had come here just to relax and enjoy the evening. But even still, she still tried to smile back at them and pretend like she was also very happy to see them. She even asked how they were doing, to somehow keep this conversation going that she didn't really want to have. Unfortunately, she didn't remember these girls at all, and doesn't realize who they are since she saw them so many years ago. Then one of them suddenly asks who the guy is that's escorting her, and since he was really quite a good-looking young man, it was no wonder that these girls took notice of him, and inquired about this guy. And of course Ayana introduced him, and said his name was Diaval. Then, he greeted these girls, and said he was very happy to meet them. It turns out that these girls accidentally thought that he is one of the aristocrats, because not at all like ordinary knights, he looks much better and elegant. Unlike them, it turns out that he is indeed part aristocrat, but his family went bankrupt when he was a very young child, and as a result, he decided to become a knight, as he had dreamed of as a child. Though unsurprisingly, if that's not true either, he is the devil after all. Though Ayana was even glad that he was handsome and polite to everyone, because that way, he was great for distractions. At one point, Ayana was forced to step away for a while, and asked to talk without her for a while, to which the guy replied that he needed to go along with her. But the girl replied that it would be rude of him to leave the beautiful ladies without company, so it would be better if he stayed with them. Ayana tried to hint that it would really be better for him to stay with them, as she had her own womanly matters to attend to on her own. And at this point, he did get her hint, and agreed to stay with these girls. He is very good at talking to them, and thus diverting their attention to himself. Now he knew for a fact that she had some important business to attend to, so this was the perfect opportunity to take a chance and distract these girls, and they were just the right age to talk to him. Meanwhile, Ayana walked over to some assistant to ask where the women's room was around here, to which this girl replied to follow her, and she would show her where to go. At this point, the guy certainly wanted to go along with her, but realized that it would be much more beneficial if he stayed with these girls. Meanwhile, Ayana sticks to her plan and doesn't forget what she came here to do. The girl is well aware of what she needs to do and what her goal is, but in order to better understand how she needs to act now, she decided to move away to a quieter place. Besides, if Fietta didn't show up for the banquet, there was no point in her being there either. For now, she had a good opportunity to prepare even more thoroughly for the banquet and rehearse her actions. Meanwhile, the girl is determined to find something that can convince her father. But what she means, and what exactly she is looking for, is not yet clear. But from her determination, it is safe to say that she will not go home without some result. For it is much more serious than it may seem at first sight, for the lives of every one of her family depend upon it. Ayana went straight to some corridor. But what could she possibly need and use here? There wasn't even a single person there to tell her any information. For a moment, the girl stopped after the wall where many portraits of the Roselle family hung. But could it really do anything to help her achieve her goal? As she looked at these portraits, she was horrified to imagine what they could do and what they were capable of doing. Initially, the girl turned her attention to one man, and that was the famous Ansgar Roselle. As she looked at this place, she knew that very soon she would have her revenge on all these people for all that they had done to her family, for she would never forgive them, and for every one of their terrible deeds, every one of them would be held accountable. Meanwhile, Ayana suddenly began to remember how much time had passed since she had left the banquet hall. From that moment, it had been about 15 minutes, so she had to hurry back so she wouldn't be suspected in any way. It was surprising that this place seemed so much bigger than she remembered it. Although, in her previous life, she was only interested in the event itself, and had no idea what all these people were capable of doing, when suddenly she thought that perhaps it would have been much better if she had taken Diaval with her, and that perhaps it was a mistake to leave him with those girls, for he was incapable of not attracting attention, and alone, people would soon start looking for his mistress. But if two of them were caught at once, she would not be able to justify herself. As suddenly, she heard some voice. This person was walking behind her, and the girl did not know how to react to it, because everything happened too suddenly. But who could it be? Is it just some guard who keeps this palace in order? He said that guests are not allowed to come here. When the girl tried to make some excuse and pretend that she was simply lost and wanted to know how she could get to the banqueting hall, she hoped very much that she would be believed. How suddenly, when she looked at this man, it was the most horrible and yet unforeseen encounter that had happened to her in a while. It really wasn't welcome. To never see that man, she would give everything she had, for it was a face she remembered for a long time. But who could it be? This is the same guy who got her locked up months ago. He was the one who kept her in horrible conditions. The girl was without proper food, without being able to socialize with people, and more. This man was one of the ones she feared the most in her life, and being around him was so scary that the girl had already regretted many times that she had walked down the corridor and come here without Diaval. This man's name is Erez Roselle. He is a very cruel person who is never kind, and in his whole life he has never had a smile or anything like that.